I wonder whether you've heard of Nahum. I wonder whether it's a book you know. I think it's one of the lesser known books of the minor prophets. Certainly not quoted to the same extent as a book like Micah that we looked at last month. Look, when we looked at Micah, I put the prophets in the history, in the sense of their time and when they ministered. What I want to do today is I want to sort of widen our look a bit, not just in terms of history of the children of Israel, but the history of that region. So we're going to look at the ancient Near East. Now, I'll just mention that I've taken these shots from a video which I think is really very good. And it's this YouTuber, Ollie Bai. And what he's done is created a series of maps which show you the history of this region. And what they've done with this particular one, he's got a map for each year from 2500 BC right up to 525 BC. Okay, so a long spread of time over 2,000 years where he's showing you the maps. And this is the map for 2433 BC or BCE, which is before the Common Era. And if you want to go look for these, then this is the address you need to go to. So a couple of things I want you to notice about this first map. Think about where the Promised Land is over on the left-hand side there. That strip of water that they've got, it's not quite the shape we're used to it being. You'll see it change as we go through, but we have the Promised Land over there on the left-hand side, not marked because it's not the tribes don't exist there at the moment. But then I want you to notice on closer to the middle and to the right-hand side, down at the bottom, there is Do you see there? Now that's Abraham's hometown, down here on this side. And then if you look towards the middle of the picture, you'll see Nineveh and you'll see Asher. Now those two little groups of land, they are the beginning of the Assyrian Empire, and you will see that grow as we look at these maps. Now, I just want to give you a sense of scale, because if you're like me, you look at this and you have no idea how big it is. And I'll just show you how it relates. So the two ends of that arrow on this side, closest to me, is Babylon. And on the other side is Jerusalem. Now that is a distance of 2,700 kilometres in a straight line. Now that's like the distance between Melbourne and Cairns. Or if you live in the US, it's between New York and Houston, Texas. That's that sort of distance. We're talking about a really large stretch of land here. Okay, so just bear that in mind in what we do, talking, as we go on. Now, what I'm going to do now is jump forward. That's the map, as I said, 2400 BC. We're going to jump 1200 years from here to here. So notice the Assyrian Empire has suddenly appeared, and look how large it is. But we'll see over here on the right, on the left-hand side, this is now the Promised Land populated by the 12 tribes, 1160 BC. Then if we move on a little, we'll see it change again. Now we have, instead of 12 tribes of Israel, we have the United Kingdom. This is the kingdom of Israel as it looked under the three kings of Saul, David, and Solomon. The other thing that I want you to notice on this map is right down the bottom left-hand corner is Thebes. The town of Thebes, you'll see it there. And I just want you to flag that one for yourself, because we're going to come back to Thebes. If we move on now to 927 BC, we can see Israel's there is highlighted in green, but notice Judah just underneath it. This is the divided kingdom. Okay, so you have the larger land at the top, Israel, and Judah, the smaller one. The two countries have separated. Now, I'm going to take you through a quick succession of slides, 260 years, and watch what happens. Now remember how big that map was? 2,700 kilometres wide, at least. And over the course of 260 years, the Assyrian Empire really has filled it. That's what's happened here. Now I've taken you to the year 664 BCE. And what I want you to notice is Israel is gone. It's no longer there. You'll see Judah is still there. They've shaded it in blue because really it's under the thumb of the Assyrian Empire. But then I want you to notice that so is Egypt. Egypt is also under the thumb of the Assyrians. And this is the time, it's the year before the sack of Thebes. So Thebes, if you remember, was down in that bottom left-hand corner. And in the year 663, the Assyrians attacked Thebes. The reason they did it was, as I said, Egypt was under the thumb of Assyria, but with, political machinations that go on, sometimes one king he's not doing what he's told. So they have to send the army in and try and make a point. And they do it by attacking a city. And so Thebes gets attacked in 663 BC. But then I also want you to notice, again around the middle towards the bottom, you can see a tiny little light blue dot, which is Babylon. Now what happens is Babylon becomes an increasing threat. And it takes over the Assyrian Empire. And eventually Nineveh itself is conquered. And so Babylon, they take over the known world effectively at that time. And notice now also Judah is gone. This is the point where Judah is exiled and taken into Babylon. Many of the rulers, we know the story of Daniel so very well. Daniel is taken into Babylon, that 2,700 kilometre journey. What I should say actually is that 2,700 kilometres, in this part of the world, it's not possible to walk it in a straight line because you're going through desert. If you're going to do that journey, you've got to actually go to the north and come back down. So it's a much longer journey actually than the 2,700 kilometres. Anyway, I'm going to go back a step or two. And we're going to go to 621 BCE, to that map. Because this is the time when Nahum is working. This is what the world looks like at that time. And we read in the first verse of Nahum, we read this: the burden against Nineveh, the book of the vision of Nahum the Elkoshite. Now the name Nahum means comfort. It's related to another biblical name, Nehemiah. Nehemiah is the name of another biblical book, is the man who rebuilt Jerusalem after the children of Israel came back from their exile in Babylon. But Nahum, comfort for this book. And it says in the verse, it's a burden against Nineveh. This is a proclamation of judgment against Nineveh. And at the same time, it's a proclamation of hope and comfort to Judah. And that's where I think the name is important. It's a comfort to Judah. Now, of course, we've already read another prophet who spoke against Nineveh. And that was, can you remember? Was Jonah. Jonah spoke against Nineveh. So we assume that Jonah's prophecy was written before Nahum's. But by the time we get to this point in history, Nineveh's had their chance, their opportunity to repent. According to the story of Jonah, they've repented, but it seems that they've come back to their old ways. And what Nahum prophesies is that there's no way out anymore. That they've had their chance and they've lost it. The book of Nahum is only 3 chapters long. Like many of the minor prophets, it's very short, very easy to read, quick to get through. And we date it quite accurately because of what Nahum writes. So this verse tells us that he's writing prior to the end of the fall of Nineveh, okay, which was in 612 BC. But there's another verse later on in chapter 3 where we read this: "Are you better than No Amon, that is situated by the river, that had the waters around her, whose rampart was the sea, whose wall was the sea?" And No Amon is Thebes. So we date Nahum's work because he refers to the fall of 2 cities, one in the past, and that's Thebes, which was in 663, and one in the future, which he's prophesying, which is Nineveh, which is 612. So we can narrow him down to that 50 years. Nahum is not widely quoted, as I've mentioned before, but I wonder whether your ears pricked up to some of the words that I read in that first chapter. So at the end of chapter 1, we read these words again: "Behold, on the mountains, the feet of him who brings good tidings, who proclaims peace." Did you hear that? They're familiar words, but they're actually familiar words from the book of Isaiah. This is Isaiah chapter 52. "How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news, who proclaims peace, who brings glad tidings of good things, who proclaims salvation, who says to Zion, your God reigns." Those are the words we're really familiar with. And it seems that either Nahum or Isaiah are quoting one or the other. There are a couple of other things I'll just bring to your attention worth looking out for in the book of Nahum. First of all, he compares Nineveh to a dwelling of lions. So you imagine a group of lions who go looking for food. He talks about the machinery of war, and Assyria was a war machine, if it was nothing else. There's the image of the harlot also in chapter 3. And there's the image of locusts in chapter 3. Now, we've come across locusts before in the previous minor prophets also. So they're some of the images to look out for in the book of Nahum. I just wanted to dwell a little bit on this double-edged, almost contradictory view of the Lord that we read in chapter 1 that I shared with you this morning. So, verse 2, God is jealous and the Lord avenges. The Lord avenges and is furious. And then in verse 7, the Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble, and he knows those who trust in him. We have this, I say, almost a contradictory view of the Lord here. All right, I just want to dwell on what it is that we learn from Nahum. And I think about this on 2 different levels. On a very simple level, we have what's known as lex talionis, or the law of retaliation. And we see it in, I'll just quote Nahum chapter 3, verse 11. And he's talking about the attack on Thebes. And bear in mind that it was carried out by the Assyrians. Here you have this town which the Assyrians have marched into and taken over to make a point. And Nahum says this: "You also will be drunk. You will be hidden. you also will seek refuge from the enemy. So this idea that the evils that you perpetrate get visited back upon you. Now, in the teachings of our church, we have this principle really clearly spelt out. And this is from Arcana Celestia. Good done with all one's heart carries its own reward together with it. And evil done with all one's heart carries its own punishment together with it. So it is that heaven is the reward for good people and hell the punishment for evil ones. Okay? So the evil that you do carries its own punishment inherent in it. And this is one of the lessons I learned from Nahum. But the deeper lesson, what Swedenborg talks about, he talks about Assyria as meaning the rational. And he means the rational part of our mind. And what I want you to hang on to is, when we look at these histories, whether we're talking about the prophets, whether we're talking about books like Kings and Judges, these various tribes and nations and empires that attack this little country actually reflect the evils that the children of Israel themselves perpetrate. They're the evils and the bad things they get tangled up with are reflected by these other nations that come and attack them. So we can look at any of that historical section of the word, these various wars, as the attacks of different evils upon the children of Israel. But there's quite a positive view of Assyria as well, and I want to share one more. This is from Isaiah chapter 19, and it's a lovely picture. In that day there will be a highway from Egypt to Assyria. And the Assyrian will come into Egypt, and the Egyptian will come into Assyria. And the Egyptians will serve with the Assyrians. In that day Israel will be one of three with Egypt and Assyria, a blessing in the midst of the land, whom the Lord of hosts shall bless, saying, Blessed is Egypt, my people, and Assyria, the work of my hands, and Israel, my inheritance. Now, it's a lovely picture of three world powers working cooperatively together. But the thing about it is there's a hierarchy. Egypt is the lowest, Assyria is the middle, and Israel is the top. And when that hierarchy stands, then there is peace. This is what Swedenborg writes about this passage. This is referring to the spiritual church, of which Israel is the spiritual element. Assyria or Asher is the rational, and Egypt the factual. These three constitute all the intellectual powers of that church, which come in that order, one after another, though that order of three is important. The interesting thing is that vision never took place. It never happened in a physical sense. So this blessing really never found a footing in the world. So just think about this idea of Assyria being the rational part of the mind. They're the middle part of the mind. They look at what is factual, what is, earthly and solid, and they draw conclusions from it. But the reason they draw conclusions from it is to serve what is highest. And Israel represents what ought to be highest. You get that in the wrong order, and there's all hell to pay, as they say. And this is what happens, we think of ourselves so often as rational beings, but we are not. Our rational part, the rational part of our mind, is intended to serve something higher. We need to find a higher will, and that higher will is love to the Lord and love of other people. If our rational does not serve that, then we exist under the slavery of the rational. Now the thing is that that state is not a permanent one. The state of serving the rational is not permanent, because in reality, what really serves the rational, what the rational really serves, if it does not serve the Lord, it serves the self. And what happens is the self will run in and take over. And this is what Nahum is saying. Nahum is prophesying the end of the rational. It must either be taken over by the Lord or it will be taken over by the self. And he talks about the empire of Babylon, referring to the love of domineering. The love of domineering. And if we do not serve the Lord, we serve the love of domineering. And so Babylon marches in and they take over the whole empire, as we saw took place in the world. So that's Nahum's message to us. Don't get hung up on rational things. Think about what the rational is meant to serve. Last thing I'll just mention is that I think the whole sweep of the word from beginning to end is the story of one of two things. It is either our spiritual development or it is our spiritual degeneration. It's either our ascent into heaven or it is our descent into hell. And what is it that makes the difference? It's the recognition of what is going on within my own heart. Am I able to look at myself and see my own tendencies towards the kind of evils that Babylon represents? If I'm able to see the evils that I'm capable of, then I can turn and make a choice for the Lord. If I'm not able to see those evils, then I am bound to go down that path that those evils push me towards, and I will have no alternative other than to follow that path. So, is Nahum a comfort? Or is it a challenge?